Alrighty, Josh Rubin from East West Healing and Performance. Today I want to talk to you about tinnitus, motion sickness, vertigo, and things like that. Now, of course, there's a lot of people out there that say it's always nutritional, it's always C0, C1, C2, and you have to see a chiropractor. It means you have a bacterial infection or some type of immune system problem in your ear. And of course, I don't disagree with those, but holistic health is really looking at the person and seeing why that person might have tinnitus, which is ringing in the ears. What I find is, yes, it can be alleviated by nutrition, but there's a lot of people out there that play sports, that fall on their head, bump their head, they fall on their coccyx, their sacrum, their pelvis, you name it. As a child and adult, that actually will constantly have ringing in the ears, and it can actually be very debilitating. Same thing with vertigo. Now, I'm going to give you a different school of thought, and I'm not going to tell you, well, I'm going to tell you kind of who to see, but the problem is you're going to have to really do your research to find the person that works for you, because as you know, there's some really good practitioners that do what they do in a specific arena, and there's a lot of practitioners that are just learning, we could say that. What I recommend is you finding a great skilled craniosacral therapist, a great skilled osteopathic doctor that's trained outside the U.S., maybe the UK, maybe Canada, Switzerland, Germany, something like that, that is skilled in cranial osteopathy, or a U.S. trained osteopath that actually is trained in cranial osteopathy, because that's where you need to look. Now, it could come from other issues like foot issues, knee issues, coxofemoral issues in the hip coming across the body to the sacrum, shoulder, cranium, and different sutures, but we're going to focus on the cranium. Now, in your cranium, right about here, straight back, you have what's called the sphenoid. It looks just like that. This is the back of your cranium, that's the occiput. Now, I took away the whole cranium in itself. Now, there's three axes to this. There's the transverse axis, an AP axis, and a vertical axis. And those axes allow this, what's called the SPS, to flex on inhalation and extend on exhalation. They allow them to rotate, and they allow them to side bend on the vertical axis. So they rotate on the AP axis through the nasion to the opistheon in the back. So that's important because the temporal bone, trying to get this together and it's not going together, of course, in the middle of my YouTube. You have the temporal bone, which is actually three bones. It's the squama, the mastoid, and the petrous portion of the temporal bone. And the reason I want to talk about this is because the cranial nerve 8, which is the vestibulocochlear nerve, it actually works the cochlear part for hearing, and hearing, of course, and then the vestibular part, which is equilibrium. So that nerve actually does two different things. It comes out, actually, it originates from the pons in the brainstem, and actually goes right through the temporal bones. It goes right through the internal acoustic meatus of the temporal bone. Now, if we look at the SBS, which is this complex, the sphenoid and the occiput, and we put this temporal bone on, if I can figure out how to do this really quickly, figure out where it goes. Sorry. Right, there we go. So you have this part of the SBS, you're looking at your cranium, there's your sphenoid, the yellow, occiput in the back, and then this side is your temporal bone. Right, looking at the side of your head if I was like this. So that temporal bone actually anteriorly rotates and externally rotates on inhalation. So the bone will actually drop forward and externally rotate on inhalation, and actually comes back, posterior rotates, and internally rotates on inhalation. And it does that on two different axes. But it actually can influence, or it can be influenced by the sphenoid and the occiput. So if the sphenoid and the occiput are not working properly, if there's some type of lesion, whether it's a torsion lesion of the sphenoid, whether it's locked in flexion, whether it's locked in extension, whether there's a side bending rotation, any type of lesion, you'll affect the mechanics of the temporal bone, which is the side of your head, on inhalation and exhalation. So the bone might get locked in anterior rotation and external rotation, which is an outflare. It might get locked in an internal rotation, posterior rotation, which is an inflare. Or it might get locked there and move a little bit into anterior rotation and come back. Or it might be an anterior rotation, move a little bit back into posterior rotation and come back. So there's something going on. So if the SBS, right, sphenoid occiput, influences, especially the petrous portion of the temporal, it's going to influence where the vestibulocochlear nerve actually exits through the internal acoustic meatus. And this is going to influence how that nerve is pumped or milked through that cavity in a sense. So when it goes through that cavity, it's actually pumped and nourished. Now, if a bone, any of these bones, and there's other bones that can influence, the parietals, the ethmoid, the frontal bones, all these things can influence your temporals. Your iliums or your nominate can actually influence your temporal bones. Your sacrum, there's so many things that can influence it. So if there's a lesion there and that nerve is actually being impinged, or any way, that nerve is influenced how it comes out through that structure, the internal acoustic meatus, can actually create a lot of the symptoms that people get. They get tinnitus, ringing in the ears, motion sickness, vertigo, things like that. So think about this from a physical perspective. If you've bumped your head a lot, if you play hockey, if you've fallen on your pelvis, fallen on the side, maybe fallen off your bike, and you've had ringing in the ears, and you've tried nutritional therapy, you've tried doing lab tests, you've looked at bacterial infections, nothing's worked. So hopefully you've learned something. This is just another school of thought on what could be causing these symptoms that most people are suffering with. And we're trying medications, we're trying herbs, but a lot of the times, the bones of your cranium, all your bones actually move upon inhalation and exhalation. All your midline bones actually flex on inhalation, and they extend in inhalation. On exhalation, sorry. And all your paired bones in the side of your cranium, or all the paired bones in the cranium, actually anterior rotate and externally rotate on inhalation, and posteriorly rotate and internally rotate on exhalation. So if any of that movement, they slide on one another, if any of that is actually influenced, or if any of that is actually disturbed, all the cranial nerves can be disturbed, and you can start showing digestive, hormonal, you name it, dysfunctions in the body. So thanks for tuning in. I'm out of here.